We just did a men's retreat this weekend. We went mountain biking, but we tried to add a little bit of programming.
You did a men's retreat, Max? There's not a term in the English language that makes me think of my evangelical upbringing more than fucking men's retreat.
Yeah.
Woo!
Okay, so let's record the intro now.
So what did Milkless? Because I think we start with the name.
Two dads, we love our kids, but then we also need them to know that we're like pretty cool and it's not like a wimpy podcast. So, hey, Milkless.
Hey, welcome. Hey,
Milkless. Call the audience, Milkless. What's up, Milkless? Matt and Max coming at you.
What if that's it? That's our first take. On this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking to Dan Koch. This dude's a beast. He's a father and a licensed therapist. He was once the lead guitarist in a rock band. He hosts the just unbelievably good podcast, You Have Permission, where actually Max and I are appearing today. Check it out. In addition to seeing clients, Dan's area of research is in spiritual abuse, but he is also a man of faith. So Dan spends a lot of time and effort thinking about both the dangers and the really beautiful things about incorporating spirituality into your family's life. Don't worry, this is not proselytizing. Max is a total heathen. I'm pretty close. We're really just trying to figure out how to create some kind of connection to something outside of ourselves, regardless of what kind of background you come from. Super interesting conversation. Dan is a fucking great hang. Here we go.
All right, Matt, today we have a guest. We got Dan Koch on the program. We're going to be talking about spirituality, religion, and you know me, baby. I'm a card-carrying atheist, although I do love Christmas. Let's get into it. Matt, how do you want to start this one today?
Well, Dan, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
I've been excited to talk to you about this. You know, I also didn't grow up with like a strong specific faith background. We went to Unitarian church for a minute and then slipped and fell and then we were nothing. But I am interested in having a spiritual life. I do like there are things about the religious experience that have a pull to me, including community, some things I'm sure we're going to talk about today. Your research has been a lot on the side of like, okay, what are the impacts of having religion in your life, both positive and negative, for parents, for kids, for family? And what's interesting to me is if we kind of take out the specific religion, if we're, no pun intended or pun intended, if we're agnostic to what kind of faith we're talking about, what are the real positives that often come with faith? And then what are maybe some of the negatives that often come with faith? And what are the important lessons that we can take away from the idea of religion to try to incorporate or not incorporate?
Yeah, like what would it be like to be doctrineless?
Yes.
You might say.
Doctrineless.
But still spiritual. Okay, so actually, I think you're setting out a pretty good distinction that would be a great thing to talk about first, which is the difference between spirituality and religiosity or religion. Religiosity is just the term we use for the practice of religion. Mm-hmm. So the simplest way to think about it, spirituality is an internal process. There's a lot of research that shows that human beings have an innate capacity for transcendence. We want to have experiences that take us outside of ourselves as an individual experiencer. So for instance, seeing, like put it this way, sitting at home and reading Bono's book, that's an interesting individual experience someone might have. Seeing U2 in the sphere with 10,000 people and being overwhelmed by sensory perceptions is a fully different experience, right? Mm-hmm. And the same person might really want to do both. Jonathan Haidt, the moral and social psychologist, says we're 90% chimp and 10% bee. And that kind of group transcendence, that's the bee part. Mm-hmm. That's the part of us that wants to be a part of a hive. And we get into flow state. So flow state can happen individually, but flow state also happens at a concert. It happens in these large groups. It happens at a march, right? So we want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves while also we are individuals.
Okay, so that's spirituality, this desire to both personally and as a group be connected to something larger than ourselves that feels transcendent or holy or whatever.
Yeah.
And I definitely, when you describe that pull, I feel that very strongly. I look for that in nature a lot of times. I do love a good concert.
Yeah, like I feel it even on the individual level when I'm mountain biking, they call it flow.
Yeah.
Where you are no longer your ego, your conscious self.
Yeah.
You become one with what you're doing.
Awe, wonder, interconnectedness, meaning. We can get that kind of transcendence through thinking about a higher power like God, or, like in 12-step worlds, it can be the higher power can be the group. The higher power, it's anything outside of just the four walls of my own shitty little self, right? We're just trying to get past that. I was just listening to your guys' This Is 40 episode, and Max, you kind of connect to this idea. I would call it a gratitude practice, but it also had some awe in there of like, I get this moment with my family. I'm healthy right now. I get to be a part of this thing. Like that's an experience of spirituality in the sense in which I'm using it, even though there's no religious content to it.
So we've got spirituality. Let's talk religion for a second. Like make that distinction for us.
Yeah. So again, this gets a little blurry, but if spirituality is innate and internal, it's basically this capacity that we naturally evolve as human beings. Religiosity is, you could primarily think of it as external. So it's religions utilize that spiritual capacity, but they form collectively agreed upon beliefs, practices, rituals, right? So it's more structured than pure spirituality. It tends to be more communal. It tends to involve participation in things with other people. And then it also can even give sort of language and content to individual experiences like a prayer practice. So there was all this pressure when I was growing up evangelical to have our quiet times every day. This was like your 15 to 30 minutes at the beginning of the day or the end of the day where you read the Bible in a devotional manner, looking for something for it to speak to you. And, the lame part of that was the sort of expectation and the judgment when you didn't have a good answer to the ubiquitous question, how are your quiet times going? Usually the answer was not great. But as a therapist, I would say like the positive of that was like training people to spend some intentional time every single day. If you can do it without the weight of the guilt, and if you could do it because you want to do it, I literally give my therapy clients journaling homework almost every single week because it's good for them to think about what's going on in the areas of their life that they're trying to change. Right. So then religion is it's the organized version essentially of spirituality. There's a little bit of bleed over.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The thing that's so hard for me is like everything that you say, I pretty much agree with and think is awesome.
It's going to be a boring fucking episode, Max.
Yeah. The problem is like the term religion has so much stuff.
Yeah.
Years of war, like persecution,
yeah,
pedophilia going on in certain religions, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
There's some real fucked up shit. That's why I think we're so happy to have you on, is that you are a religious and spiritual person who also is kind of like, I'm not just like, whatever the pastor, priest, rabbi says goes. It's like you using your own sort of brain there.
I'm constitutionally incapable of being that kind of a follower, I think. And I learned that at 14 when I got into punk rock. But yeah, I mean, so by the way, on the clergy sex abuse thing, there are very obviously institutional problems within that church that allowed that to happen and the cover up. And but for instance, people don't talk about this nearly as much, but like the Boy Scouts of America has settled something like, don't quote me on the exact number, like 2 to 4 times as many cases of sexual abuse as the Catholic Church has.
Wow.
There might be a kind of a naive sense we have that if we just get rid of the religion part, we'll solve the pederasty.
Yeah.
But the pederasty is probably more like a feature of human groups.
Yeah.
Like you get enough people in
enough men.
Enough men. Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, women commit sexual assault too. And
sure.
But yes, like there is, I obviously don't mean to downplay the devastating effect of clergy sex abuse.
Yeah.
But it's not the only place that sex abuse happens.
True.
There's this guy, Boots Riley, who's he's kind of this crazy career. He was a community organizer. Then he was a hip hop star. He's on some film directors.
Yeah. Sorry to bother you.
Love
it.
And I heard a great interview with him. He was talking about community organizations and his delivery was so good. He's like, I found that on a long enough timeline, community organizations tend to lose their way because they're made of people.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's like, all of these groups are made of people.
Yeah.
And they come with all the flaws that people do.
Yeah.
And that people in big groups do.
So like when you take the time to like understand like, oh, quiet time, meditation, transcendence, through nature. That sounds all incredible. It's just like the word religion, I think, is also just, I mean, it's like, it's a massive word.
Yeah.
And there's data on, just to get some studies here to round us out as we're diving in.
Please. It's one of my favorite things about Milkless, the studies.
Yeah, we never dive in unrounded.
So I got some studies just to throw out. Pew Research 2012, across the board, every single country, actively religious people self-report as being happier.
Yeah.
Like in every single country, you're happier if you are religious. Now that's also could just be that they're saying it because they think the big guy's watching them.
Little inside baseball on that one, though, because I do spend quite a bit of time with religion researchers.
Yeah.
The move in that world is actually away from happiness studies and toward meaning studies. And that actually might be a more robust finding for religiosity, is that it brings people a sense of meaning in their life. Happiness is, as you might imagine, it's a little fuzzy.
What the fuck is happiness?
Yeah.
Right. Like,
What
how
does that even mean? Yeah.
we have a better innate sense of like, my life feels meaningful or my life feels meaningless.
Yeah.
That's a bit more, anyway, just, it's an interesting caveat.
Love it.
Yeah, I dig it.
I'm going to summarize this next study because it's kind of long, but it's a great one. I found in 2017 study with like almost 1,200 families and 4 different religion types and unaffiliated parents. And it was, I think they were looking at 8-year-olds, and based on the parents' religiosity, it tracked linearly with the parents feeling that they had high parental efficacy. So they felt like that they were in control. They like had their shit together as a parent. But it tracked like negatively with the child's functioning. So the child would have more external and internalizing behaviors. So parents had and felt like they had more control, and the kids kind of acted out a little more, what are your thoughts on that, Dan?
The acting out stuff would be in tension with some of the larger scale findings around religiosity. I'm thinking of work by like Dr. Thema Bryant Davis at Pepperdine around like adolescence and which peer groups they get involved with, and risky sexual behavior, risky drug and drinking behavior. And religiosity is basically always associated with less of that stuff. So it might be about a certain developmental age. It's tough to say. I mean, there are real downsides to religiosity, and chief among them is that it tends to make people more tribal, and they tend to have a stronger us versus them dynamic. And so the increased generosity of religious people tends to be pointed towards people that they consider within their in-group and not to people outside of their in-group, which is interesting because in a religion like Christianity, like the teachings that we have supposedly of Jesus are extremely focused on widening the in-group. But I would just say, from my perspective, there are evolutionary psychological reasons for in-group, out-group thinking that have more to do with survival and less to do with God or religious belief. And so those end up kind of overriding specific teachings. And, those drives are powerful. They're kind of wired and baked into us.
Yeah, we're pretty good at othering as a species.
Yeah.
Well, so what if we put this in a little bit more personal terms for you, Dan, if you don't mind, because you grew up evangelical. Wasn't really working for you.
I got it pretty moderate. I call it California evangelical. Like my dad's a therapist, so we weren't like anti all science.
Yeah.
My mom likes swear words, so I had a little bit of a softer version of it than listeners of my show who grew up Southern Baptist in Mississippi or something like that.
Yeah. But you grew up in a faith that at least in some ways you kind of moved away from some of the stricture of that faith.
Yeah.
But you would still call yourself a person of faith. And that is still an important part of your life. So important that you've made it your area of study. So I'm curious, what were the things you wanted to move away from, and what are the things you wanted to keep?
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff I needed to move away from were the ways in which the community that I had and the tradition couldn't answer really good questions. And that probably started for me in high school, but accelerated when I studied philosophy in college. I interviewed someone years ago who was like, in my Sunday school, the teachers told me literally either the earth is 6,000 years old or all of Christianity is bullshit.
Oh, boy.
That's not going to go well because the universe is not 6,000 years old. And gay people are not inherently displeasing to God, I don't think. I started thinking about hell. I started thinking about, for me, actually, the first issue, and this is probably because I was a fucking nerd philosophy student, but for me, the first issue was actually in the Old Testament descriptions of God telling the Israelites to murder everybody in the promised land.
Yeah. Women,
men, and children. And I was like, what the fuck? That I can't square that with the rest of this stuff. And that was sort of the first one that sent me on, what in my world we call a faith deconstruction process, that I had to sort of pull on one thread and it unraveled a whole lot of other threads. So that's the stuff that I needed to get away from. And kind of the smaller minded or like more exclusivist view that like our group, we have God's truth and other people don't have it. How do we know that? Well, we all agree. That is just like not sustainable. I don't want my kids to get that. I don't want anybody to have that. What I've kept briefly, when I read descriptions of people's spiritual experiences, I don't mean like dying and going to heaven. I mean more standard stuff, like any number of Krista Tippett's guests on Being, and they describe their experiences. I go, oh, I'm like you.
Yeah.
I have spiritual experiences. I have them in church. I have them outside of church. I have, honestly, a personal relationship with God is a pretty good shorthand. Like I have like a communicative thing with transcendence. And I could, of course, be wrong about that. But it was trained up in me. A lot of people experience this. And it does tend to line up with other things that happen to me and that I learn through reading research or becoming a better therapist or whatever. It's like it would be to deny my own experience for me to not be Christian.
Yeah.
That being said, I think 70% of the world's Christians would not agree that I'm one of them because of all the beliefs that I have shed.
That's fascinating. And by the way, On Being is one of my absolute favorite podcasts in the world. It was a big step forward for my level of calm when I quit my political podcast and started listening to poets talk about how nature makes them feel. I was like,
oh my gosh, that's a great call. Yeah.
The hang up that I always have, at least as far as religion, is I think I grew up specifically without that muscle. So no matter how much somebody told me, it's good to have religion in your life, I'm like, well, I can't just start believing it because I think it would be good for my kids if I believed it, which is why I'm interested in if you kind of strip away all of the scaffolding around of specificity around a specific religion or a specific faith.
Yeah.
What is left there that is really structural and bolsters human beings? I feel like I'm talking like a fucking robot, but I'm trying to say something kind of abstract.
Talking like a researcher. Yeah.
Your dictionary is getting away from you there. Let me dumb it down for everybody. What Matt's trying to say is, how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah.
Because we don't believe any of this shit.
So, baby and bathwater. I feel confident saying this even as a person of faith. The baby is the sense of connectivity, the sense of being accepted. Lisa Miller describes it's a higher power that is loving and guiding. That's her terminology for like the object of spiritual experience or spirituality. Higher power, loving, guiding. If you can feel like that's there, that's the baby, right? Like think about what comes from that. You're okay. You're more or less where you need to be. And there is a way forward. You are not completely resourceless in terms of what you might do with the dizzying array of choices available to you as a person with a human brain and an open future, right? So that's the baby. And the bathwater is the bullshit. It's the us versus them stuff. It's the closing ranks around our group. The trick is, of course, that a lot of the baby you get by showing up regularly with the same people, building social relationships over time. I don't know if you guys have gotten into this research in a non-religious way, but like just the importance of other adults in your children's lives.
Yeah.
A great place to meet other adults who share your rough values? Fucking church.
Yeah.
It's just a one-stop shop if we could get rid of the bullshit.
Yeah, I guess thinking about what I'm about to say, I picture myself as like the guy in Big Lebowski, like, we believe in nothing.
That must be exhausting. Oh, there we go, Matt.
But like, what if you don't believe that there's something that's loving or guiding? I think that there is like the universe, which is so massive and we don't know what happened before the Big Bang. But like, I just don't ever see myself thinking that there's something guiding me.
Yeah.
Other than maybe just like the chemical bonds in my body.
That's where it gets fucking interesting though, Max, because that is actually kind of how I mean it. Take a phrase like, we are made in God's image, right? This is from Genesis. What I was raised to believe that meant was that at some point, there were all these other animals around on day 6 or whatever. And then God was like, no, humans, these are like me, and made us sort of out of nothing, distinct from all the other animals, and that we had some special spiritual purpose as a result of that. I don't think that anymore. I believe that humans evolved through a gradual process of natural selection and genetic mutation and all that stuff. But if I...
What? Sorry.
But if we wind the tape all the way back to the Big Bang, the conditions for the universe that we live in, well, maybe what it means to be made in God's image is that, like, holy shit, a universe does exist where matter can hold together and where in some cases that can turn into biological life to the point that we can learn how old the universe is. And I don't want to assume that will make you feel something in particular, but like, there are other ways to do that.
It's funny. In the last like couple of years, I've found myself, I mean, talk about nerdy, but just like watching a lot of astrophysics lectures. Max, I think like you, I have trouble getting all the way to like a benevolent guiding force.
Yeah.
But there is something that I find a lot of comfort in about the complexity and interconnectedness of things that have led them to be the way they are.
Yeah.
Ideas like quantum entanglement, that, you know, electrons on the other side of the universe could like have matched the rotational spin. There's something about that like more than just being intellectually, that's fucking interesting, man. They feel good. It feels good that all of the heavy elements are forged in the middle of stars, which means that basically everything that our world is made of came out of a star. It was cool when I learned that for like millions of years after the Big Bang, there was no light. It was just black. And then enough particles condensed. And there was a moment well after the Big Bang that there was light. Like kind of all of these things that seem a little bit biblical, but are actually, you know, now we've really got the science to say, okay, this is how that happened.
Totally. So you can kind of get there different ways, maybe. I mean, of course, it's person to person. There is a separate question with our children. So you might personally be convinced that there is no guiding power. It is a separate question whether you want to tell your kids that conclusion or you want them to come to their own conclusion, right? That's just like a separate question.
Yeah.
And one that I think religious people don't take that question very seriously. And also sometimes non-religious people don't take that question seriously.
Yeah.
There can be a kind of a default.
We had a fun experience. Well, it's funny and not so funny, but so our daughter has made really good friends with the woman across the street, the across the street neighbor, who's probably 75-ish. It's great. It's an incredibly symbiotic relationship. She'll go over there and she comes back with chocolate all over her face and everybody's thrilled. But recently she had been playing with this kitten at my wife's parents' place. They live on a farm, and then the kitten got killed by a couple of dogs that lived there. And it was kind of an intense thing. And she was dealing with it. And she told my mother-in-law, don't worry, that kitty is in a better place. You just have to pray to the gods, which we've pieced together was a combination of the Greek myths for kids that she's been listening to and the faith background of our neighbor across the street.
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law, I think, had this like instinct, because she does not necessarily believe that. Her instinct was like, ooh, where is she getting that? And how do we disabuse her of that emotion?
Yeah.
My wife and I are much more interested in like, well, how do we talk to her about the fact that that's what our across the street neighbor believes? And but it's not what we believe, but people believe different things. Obviously, what her parents believe is going to carry a lot of weight, and it should. But to your point, it is not just a simple calculus of like, we should make them believe what we believe, right? But I don't know, Maxie, feel free to...
No, I think on the one hand, I like to be truthful with our kids on like what I believe, but I also don't want to be dogmatic in my approach of saying like, here's what we believe in our family. Everything else is crazy. We have a lot of religious friends like, oh yeah, that's what they believe. And like, is it true? I'm like, well, I don't really know. I only know what I believe. And then that gets into what I think. But like I always say, like, you guys can figure that stuff out. If you ever want to learn more about it, check it out. And I think you just keep it open, because also just like no one wants to be told what to do.
Yeah.
And I also know some religious people who grew up saying like, this is how it is.
Yeah.
Like, no, it isn't. If you're told what to do,
Yeah.
if you're told too much, like a lot of people will.
Yeah, there's a natural rebellion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Violet Archer in the Case of the Purple Martin. It's a chapter book with illustrations on every page. You can read it to them if they're 5, 6-year-olds, but then as soon as they can read, up till 12, 13, it's an insanely good book with plot twists like worthy of an adult's attention. I love this thing. I'm so proud of Matt and Milkless of putting this thing out. So if you want to support Milkless and get an awesome book for your kids, it'd mean a whole lot to us if you bought it. Check the podcast description for the link to Amazon and buy it today. And if you already have it, you can pop back into Amazon and give us an honest review. Thanks.
I do think there's a real push that you guys are both naming and that I really share for some humility on our part toward our children. And what's cool about that is that the best research on the value of religion makes a distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for being religious. Extrinsic motivation is like, if I don't go to church, someone will be upset with me, or this is what all the citizens do in my country, or my mother-in-law will judge us if we don't take our kids, whatever. That is not associated with positives for religious involvement for the person whose motivation is extrinsic. All the benefit comes from intrinsic motivation. I'm doing this because in some sense, I want to be here.
Interesting.
I find meaning in this. I enjoy this. I like the music. My friends are here. That's when you start to see the social benefits, the negative association with depression and anxiety, the meaning making. They show up when somebody is doing it on their own steam. So you could force your kids, but then they're not even going to get the benefits anyway. So there is kind of a middle ground for both the non-religious and religious parent in terms of like how to do this for the kids. The good version of those two are closer than maybe the wider culture would have us assume.
Yeah. Because you want to make sure that they discover Creed on their own. It's a great rock
You
band.
can't open their arms wide open for them.
Oh, yeah.
They got to open that shit up themselves.
But in a more serious note, my mom actually did this, who was self-proclaimed a card-carrying atheist, but my father, before they got divorced, like was not like super religious, but Catholic. And, we were in Peru meeting his family when I was 6 and I got baptized there. And I remember just being like, do you believe in this? And she's like, no, but I mean, they might be right. And like, keep you from hell. So why not?
What's the cost?
Like, who gives a shit?
It's a good hedge.
Yeah, it's a little hedge.
Yeah, like it wasn't like that it's such a big deal, like to be dogmatic one way or the other. It's like, if you want to get into this, get into this.
Here's kind of how I see it. And I, as a therapist, I've had some child clients. It's not like my area of expertise, but in internship, I have a little bit of experience with it. And I would loop that into my own experience as a parent and then just more general psychological education and therapeutic experience. I do think there's kind of a win-win approach here that is agnostic to the truth or falsity of God's existence or any particular religion's truth or falsity. If we can recognize, and this is what Lisa Miller says, and by the way, her book is called The Spiritual Child, if people want to kind of dig into this specifically about raising kids. If you recognize, number one, our kids have a capacity. There is a variation in how much children report this transcendent capacity, but mostly we all have it. So our kids have it. And the way that a non-religious parent would sort of encourage that is by promoting it, supporting that reflection, engaging on these questions, and encouraging our children to do that work themselves, right? Well, what do you think about that? Would it be good for us to do like a group gratitude ritual? Would that feel like a good way to remember grandma, or whatever, like anything that comes up? I'm just shooting off the top of my head.
No, but I think that's super important.
Yeah.
Like the ritual aspect.
Right. But then let's say you are religious and you do believe that some of these basic religious claims are true. Well, that's still a good way to raise a kid up to have a non-dogmatic, flexible version of religion, which is what I'm hoping to do for our boys, right? Like, I don't want to indoctrinate them because it doesn't fucking work. It won't lead to intrinsically motivated religiosity anyway. So there are problems there structurally because the churches that have the most resources to help kids, like have a fun youth group and stuff, they are conservative churches for the most part. But I do think there's a lot of convergence in that middle area. And like, you're encouraging these capacities and this curiosity and this awe and this sense of connectivity. And to me, it's kind of win-win.
Yeah.
Well, just quick little sidebar, because I'd love to just know if the listeners out there are not total fucking heathen like I am and have some belief in a God and want to do like a cool church, I will not be doing this. But Dan, what are like some churches that like accept gay people and like, and you can be kind of progressive and talk about shit? Like, what are those? What are like a handful of those called? Yeah.
So in my mind, the most straightforward thing to try if you are going for sort of max benefit and minimum risk, nothing is risk free. There are shitty people in every institution, but basically mainline Protestant denominations in the United States, Canada, England, Australia, and sort of the Anglosphere. These are Episcopal churches, United Church of Christ, most United Methodist churches, most Presbyterian Church in the USA. There's different Presbyterian churches. There are these denominations that generally, the ones I'm describing, they are gay affirming. They accept science. They are focused on justice, for instance. And, you know, you're not going to, nothing's perfect. They also often are full of old people because a lot of the young people with families from the 70s to the early 2000s, was a very long major exodus into more conservative evangelical type churches. But they do exist that have some young families. And the best way to find one of these churches is to go to gaychurch.org. I cannot guarantee what gaychurch.com will take you to, but gaychurch.org has like a map function. And it's just like every church that is gay affirming, by which I mean, you do not think that someone is sinning just because they are gay.
And then are there like Jewish or Islam?
Yeah. So in Judaism, you're probably going to want to look for Reform Judaism. That is the kind of more secular version.
Everything you're saying is so cool, like about the ritual, about like the community aspect, about your beliefs. I tend to believe a lot of what you believe, with the exception of like the sentient power there. But I mean, we're like 99% on the same page. So it's kind of like, why the mental gymnastics to make it work? Like, why is Dan doing these mental gymnastics to say, like, well, when they say this horrible shit, what they mean is less horrible shit?
Well, okay, yeah, that's a great question. Let me just clarify something. I don't believe that God wrote the Bible.
Yeah.
And a lot of Christians, that's basically what they mean. Now, I don't believe that's true. It's poetry. It is, I think of it as a wisdom tradition. And the stuff that stuck around is the stuff that was useful to people.
Yeah.
That does not mean that it's all accurate. But what a wisdom tradition gives us is like a full set of tools. So imagine you're getting married and you have two choices. You can either start registering for all the tools you want for your new home, or your father-in-law pulls you aside and says, hey, buddy, I would like to offer you my full garage of tools. Now you're going to find some of those tools are not safe to use, but 75% or so of this garage, it's all good to go. You don't have to start over, but you're going to have to do some work on it. That is essentially what I think I'm saying yes to by remaining a Christian.
Yeah.
It would actually be untrue to myself to start over.
Yeah.
Because I do use those tools. I pray, Max. I try. I do it a lot less with young kids, but I try to engage in contemplative prayer practice because it fucking works.
Yeah.
And the best moments of my life have been just a pure flooding of joy. Those include the births of my children, but they also include some prayer moments, some other kind of more spirituality moments. I don't think it's mental gymnastics. I like that term. I use that term to apply to people who try to hold on to the more exclusivistic, rigid. That's mental gymnastics. I actually think that what I'm doing is pretty honest. And I don't know, and I will not know while I'm alive. I cannot know for sure. But I have to choose to live one way or the other. And it is actually more honest of me to live the religious way, as long as I can find a way to make that work.
Well, that makes sense. And I support you.
Okay, good, because I was going to hang up otherwise, so I'm glad to hear you say that. I was going to be fucking out of here.
Fucking out of here. I do think that there is a lack of humility from anyone who feels that they believe something with great certainty.
Yeah.
It's funny, you know, the same way that you say it would be kind of dishonest of you to try to repiece this together without what you grew up with. To me, it would be like my father-in-law saying, you got this whole garage worth of tools. You just got to believe that you're a pink elephant. And I'm like, I do want those tools, but
Can't believe that. Yeah,
Can't believe it.
Yeah.
And the pink elephant, obviously that's an absurd belief.
Yeah.
You're not being asked to believe absurd things. But that said, I have a tattoo on my arm that says "The Place Above Us," which is a line from a poem when I wrote when I was like 15 about transcendence. Very non-religious, but like I have a real pull toward that shit.
You could start a religion and we would follow you.
Or are you talking to Matt or me?
Both.
Oh, okay. Maybe this will be our next joint project, Matt. You and I get a religion going.
Yeah, just drum up a religion. That usually goes pretty well, and there's never any abuse involved. But I do think there's things like, I mean, Guy, you said up at the top, this connection to something outside of the four walls of yourself. I mean, People do not feel connected to things bigger than themselves, and it is a fucking drag. Mm-hmm. It really wears people out. I think we've talked about ritual. I also think about rites of passage.
Yes.
That community aspect, and a community that is united by something bigger than just fucking hanging out. All of those things are things that I am really trying to intentionally build into my kids' lives and into my family's life. But it feels hard. Like, I remember thinking when my daughter turned 5, I need to build this rite of passage for her and bring all these people around and have this thing happen where and then I just didn't do it because it all felt silly.
So much work too. I mean, it's just like Herculean.
It's so much work, and it felt like woo-woo and weird if it wasn't like built on top of some specific religion or a specific faith.
Also, Matt, you didn't mention service. So
great point.
Yes.
I like the way you're talking about it, Dan, that like it is a set of things. Also, like most of the teachings are like help your neighbor, be nice. Like,
I mean, secular humanism is mainline liberal Protestantism without God. Like, I love this line from the comedian Lisa Gilroy, and she's a Canadian, was raised evangelical. And they were like, what's it like to still be religious in LA? And she was like, once I realized that people were charging their crystals by the moonlight, I was like, oh, I'll just be fucking Christian. Like, that's not any weirder.
Right.
When you've got like tech geniuses talking about simulation theory, maybe we're living in a simulation and there's a master coder who set this simulation up. I'm just like, oh, fucking God. Like, what are you? What the fuck?
Yeah.
So, and that's not an argument for God necessarily. It's just like, there's a lot of weird shit.
Like the same card-carrying atheists in the tech world are like, no, man, we're in a simulation. I got a crystal in my vagina.
I didn't know that's where you put it.
Like,
where do I put it?
Who? I think that also when we focus and argue over these specifics, what we fail to recognize is a very universal human need for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, maybe just to kind of like sum it up, I feel like we're all on the same page on this. Some sort of transcendence, mindfulness, and interconnectedness is important. Rites of passage and ritual, whether that's saying what you're thankful for at the Thanksgiving dinner table, some sort of like service and helping your community, and then just like some good mission, vision, value statement for your family.
Absolutely.
And community that is built around those things, I think, is the last piece of that.
Yeah. Like, for example, we just did a men's retreat this weekend. We went mountain biking, but we tried to add a little bit of programming.
You did a men's retreat, Max? There's not a term in the English language that makes me think of my evangelical upbringing more than fucking men's retreat.
Yeah. But like, again, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that like, you know, even the word spirituality gives me a little bit of a cringe. And like, I think chatting with you kind of helps. Like, I like the idea of like maybe doing an exercise with my kids. Like, if we're out and see a beautiful waterfall, like, hey guys, let's just take a moment and let's just like stare at this and just see what happens for 5 minutes and just like feel if maybe we're connected to this waterfall somehow. It's a little woo-woo, but it's like, yeah, it's important.
I get the same kind of woo-woo, like, but that comes back to the humility that we do not fully understand all of the ways that we are connected to the universe and the ways that the universe is connected to us. it is enough for me to say, like, we don't get it, but the synchronicity of the universe as it is such a cause for awe.
Mm-hmm.
And that really what we need at the end of the day is awe.
Can I say preach it? Amen. Is that?
Yeah. Namaste. Yeah. And all, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
And also with you.
And also with you.
Maxie, I like your sum up. I think that kind of brings us back. There is something fun when you really get in there, and whether you come from a faith background or not from a faith background, you say, like, I'm going to make this make sense and work for me.
Yeah.
Then you can start to build things that are meaningful in your life, which is a fucking cool thing. It just takes work.
A question you can ask yourself as a parent is like, what am I willing to put up with for something that might help my child? And I think about, like, the minute that my son appears to like drumming, I'm going to buy him a fucking drum set. Like, I know that. Like, that's how my parents were. Mm-hmm. And I will live with just cacophonous pounding for hours a day per week to support something that my son likes. What if he might like to go to church? Can I sit in church for an hour? Like where does it fall? And I'm not trying to tell people how to answer this question, but you can ask yourself, where would that fall for me on the hierarchy of things? If my child does seem like to have an interest in this stuff, and that could be church, but it could be other things. It could be like wanting to hike more than I want to hike, or it could, whatever. Anything that brings about this awe and connectivity and whatever. Like, where does it fall? Because if I'd be willing to buy them a drum set at the drop of a hat because I think that that's so cool and important, what else could we really do?
I'd be willing to buy a Creed CD.
The line has to be somewhere. Come on. Like, you've done research on this. Is Creed not spiritual abuse? Does that not constitute?
What do you buy? Violet Archer.